authority and power. We think we understand them, but what happens when someone shows up who can command not just people, but sickness, social barriers, and even death itself? Today, we're exploring a series of encounters that completely redefined what authority means.
That's such a fascinating way to look at these stories, especially when you consider how Jesus completely upends everyone's expectations right from the start with the paralyzed man.
Picture this scene. You've got these guys who've probably carried their paralyzed friend across town, fighting through crowds, and when they finally get to Jesus, he doesn't even mention the paralysis. Instead, he says something that nearly starts a riot. Your sins are forgiven.
The religious scholars must have been absolutely stunned. In their minds, this was basically spiritual treason, claiming an authority that belonged to God alone.
And that's exactly what makes this moment so powerful. Jesus deliberately sets up this demonstration of his authority. He essentially says, "You think forgiving sins is shocking? Watch this." Then he heals the guy's paralysis just to prove his point about having divine authority.
You know what's really interesting about this? The way he addresses their unspoken thoughts. He doesn't wait for them to voice their objections. He calls them out directly.
And then he immediately follows this up with something even more controversial, recruiting Matthew, a tax collector, to join his inner circle. We're talking about someone who would have been seen as a traitor to his own people, working for the Roman occupation.
The social implications of this choice must have been enormous. How did the other disciples even process having a tax collector join their group?
Well, Jesus doesn't just stop there. He goes to Matthew's house for dinner. He's literally sitting down to eat with all of Matthew's tax collector friends and other social outcasts. In that culture, sharing a meal was a profound statement of acceptance and fellowship.
And when the religious leaders criticized this, Jesus gives them this brilliant metaphor about doctors and patients. He's completely reframing their understanding of holiness.
Then we get to this fascinating sequence with the dying girl and the woman with the bleeding condition. Jesus is responding to an emergency call from a synagogue leader about his dying daughter, when suddenly this woman who's been suffering for 12 years reaches out to touch his clothes.
The contrast between these two women, one the daughter of an important religious leader, the other a ritually unclean outcast, really highlights Jesus' radical approach to status and healing.
And notice how he handles each situation differently. With the bleeding woman, he stops everything to publicly acknowledge her faith, essentially restoring her to community life. With the dead girl, he clears the room of skeptics and performs the miracle more privately.
That's such an important observation about his methods. He seems to tailor his approach to each individual situation and person.
When he arrives at the house where the girl has died, the professional mourners are already there. This was actually a common practice in that culture. When Jesus tells them she's just sleeping, they laugh at him. But he simply has them leave the room, takes the girl by the hand, and raises her from the dead.
The way these stories build on each other creates this incredible progression of Jesus demonstrating his authority over sin, social barriers, illness, and ultimately death itself.
And through it all, there's this consistent thread of faith leading to action. The paralyzed man's friends had to carry him. Matthew had to leave his tax booth. The woman had to reach out and touch Jesus' garment. The father had to publicly seek help.
So, what you're saying is that faith isn't just about believing, it's about taking concrete steps based on that belief?
Exactly. And here's what's particularly striking. All these extraordinary demonstrations of divine authority happened in the midst of ordinary daily life. Jesus is walking through town, having meals, responding to requests. These weren't staged events or carefully orchestrated demonstrations.
That really brings these ancient stories into our contemporary context, doesn't it? The idea that divine encounters can happen in the midst of our regular daily routines.
And I think that's ultimately what makes these accounts so powerful and relevant. They show us that true authority isn't just about having power. It's about using that power to bring healing, restoration, and transformation to people's lives, often in ways they never expected.